Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to crumble!
I'm Joshua Kemble, and welcome to Joshua Kemble's Livestream. I've been a freelance illustrator and graphic designer for over 20 years. I was an art director for 9 years. And when I'm not art directing and working on illustrations and graphic designs, I'm working on comic books and graphic novels, and that's usually what I do during my streams. And while conversations can go all over the place on this stream, from spicy and entertaining to goofy and silly, one thing stays consistent throughout every stream. I'll always be working on art. So pull up a chair, get your art supplies out, and get ready for an entertaining show that'll keep you company while you work on your own personal art projects. This is Joshua Kemble's Art Stream. All right, we are live. Welcome to my live stream. This is, I think, like the 351st of these things, which is nuts. That just shows you how many days I've been working on comics. So tonight I'm going to finish up the shading for page, let's see here, page 101 of Not Death But Love, The Strange Supernatural Story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And that's going to be my third graphic novel. If you want to check out my first two, you should check out Jacob's Apartment. It's a beautifully printed book, stitched and bound. So it's actually bound in signatures. Very beautiful book from Graphic Mundi. And then also two stories from Marcosia Publishing. Let me show you guys that. Wow. This book, it's a beautiful book. It's nice and big. It's very detailed black and white illustrations that are all over the place and beautiful, and talks about really important issues like faith and mental illness. And it's a very candid autobiographical story about my life. So check it out. Okay, that's my two books. There's one other order of business I want to take care of before we get to cartooning, which is what we're going to be doing on the stream for most of tonight. But I promised I was going to show guitar number 8. So I have been doing, Kyle in the CV said, first time tuning in, what is this stream all about? Well, Kyle, I tend to work on comics during the stream. So I'll be working on, let me show you real quick. We'll eventually be going here, where we'll be working on finishing up this page from a graphic novel that I'm working on. And we just kind of hang out and work on art. And then sometimes I talk about guitars. So that's kind of the stream. That was for Kyle from Twitch. So anyhow, yeah, so I'm going to show you guys guitar number 8, as I promised. I've been also kind of walking through all the different guitars that I own and just kind of telling a little bit of a story of it. Sometimes playing them. Right now, since it's about 11 o'clock, everybody in my house is sleeping. I don't think I'll be playing this guitar that I'm going to show. CB Smallwood said, it's good to see you, Mr. Kemble. I'm sorry I haven't been around. I work really early in the morning, so I don't party hard into the night as much as I used to. Same here, man. I'll say the same to you too, CB. I've been a much more like early bird in general, so I don't do a lot of late night sessions. Although tonight I'm planning on working for a couple hours to hopefully finish shading this page. So yeah, if you're working on comics, I'm more than happy to keep you company while you're up. Okay, so I'm going to show guitar number 8 and explain it. So first, I'll just kind of walk through the ones we've already shown on streams. We showed my first guitar, which was like a Squire 2, a weird 1980s, I think it's from like 1987 Stratocaster that 16-year-old me picked up at a thrift store, not a thrift store, a pawn shop, and kind of talked the guy down to like $100, which was a lot of money at that time. for me to spend on a guitar. It's kind of laughable now because that's a pretty good price for a guitar. But at the time that was like crazy money. Mowed a lot of lawns uh, for like the entire summer to pay for that thing. And then I showed you guys the Squire Telly that I received after that wasn't used. It was my first like brand new guitar buy. I showed you guys the Jasmine acoustic, which was like it's like the version of Squire that's by Takamine, and it's their first. That was my first like acoustic guitar, and I showed you guys the then Seagull acoustic, which was my first solid wood top acoustic guitar, where I had a Seagull S6. And then we looked at the modded Squire, another pawn shop buy. I had bought it at a pawn shop, and then that one I actually modded quite a bit, as well as the Squire Telly. But the Red Squire, which I think was like 20th anniversary Squire or something, that was this really pretty metallic red, and I changed the pick guard on it to be like a shell pick guard. I changed the pickups to have a hot rail and a P90, I think. and and it's a very beautiful guitar, but I even changed the knobs and kind of reworked, added locking tuners and stuff like that to it. And that's a great guitar. I showed you guys the Sterling by Music Man bass guitar that I bought. It's an active bass. So that's guitar number 6. Guitar number seven was my first American Fender, my Fender Telecaster Ultra, and that was an American guitar. It was beautiful. I kind of showed that off, and I was really excited about that. And now I'm going to show you guys guitar number 8 and kind of explain why I got it. And I'm going to call it a guitar, even though it's technically kind of not a guitar. It's a ukulele. So, after I got my Telecaster, I kind of had this idea that I wanted to record some stuff, and I also thought it would be fun to have a ukulele. It was close to Christmas time, and I thought it would be cool to have a little uke because it's easier to lug around, and if you're like hanging out with family and you want to do like Christmas carols, boom, easy peasy. Little did I know they're super fun to play, and I wish I could play it for you now. But because everybody's sleeping, I'm not going to do that. So what I'll do instead is just say, if you want to hear this in action, you can check out Got Notes on this YouTube channel, and that was a song that I recorded with this ukulele. But I love this. It's the first ukulele I got. I'm glad that the guitar store that I picked it up at recommended I get it. It's a Luna. It's called a VM, which is vintage mahogany ukulele, a soprano ukulele, which is your most common soprano, your most common ukulele. It's got this nice little inset carve on the top. It's all mahogany. I believe this is walnut. The neck is walnut. It's got this like nice little binding on the side, very subtle binding, and open tuners, which are really high quality tuners. A good indicator of a good tuner for a guitar like this is usually like the brass right here. That's a good indicator. But yeah, the tuners work really well. It's a really resonant little guy, and it's a lot of fun. And then it's got some fun like pearl inlays, but they're like triangular and they're very beautifully added. So I love this little thing. It's a fun little ukulele. It's been on a couple tracks for. I think it might end up appearing on the next No Saboteurs, but we'll see. But that's the Luna VM soprano ukulele. So that's guitar number 8. I can't wait to show you guys guitar number 9, because then we start getting back into some awesome electric action. So let me put this away, and then we'll basically rock some some art. But yeah, the ukulele's fun. I never can remember the chord placements on them, so I always have to look at chord charts because I'm still kind of new to it. The way you hold the chords is very similar to guitars. So, like, I think the G chord is kind of like the same finger position as like a D chord on a guitar. Like the D is literally just one string. I think that's the D. All of the chords are just kind of like they're very familiar, but totally different than guitar because the tuning's slightly different. So, but if you can play guitar, you can play uke, and if you learn on ukulele, you could probably easily kind of start to transition to guitar. But anyhow, that's what I will call guitar number 8. And we'll go on our guitar journey at the beginning of these streams, hopefully till we're caught up on guitars. So yeah. Anyhow, let me know if you guys find that interesting. Okay, let's get to our stream. So now we're going to do some shading on this historical fiction book about Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Robert Browning that we've been carving away at for a long time. It's page 101, and it's in black and white. How appropriate, because it's kind of like the 101 Dalmatians or something. And then we're just going to talk and hang out. So, how are you guys doing tonight? I know CB said he was watching. What are you working on nowadays, CB? I hope all is going well. I hope you're able to rock some cartooning and make some comics and stuff like that. So this page is interesting. It's Sophie, the character, has basically appeared at this this house that the Reimer's house, where Home has been residing and kind of doing these seances. And then what we're doing here is trying to. I need to actually get rid of this. I need to fix some of the stuff we already had. There we go. Home is having residency here and holding seances and stuff like that. And Sophie has had an exchange with him the last time she went to a seance at this house, and was basically trying to figure out his grift, like how he does it. And he basically invited her to come by anytime, kind of seeming like he was propositioning her. And then she kind of expressed shock and that she's like a married woman, that kind of thing, but still had an interest in how he does his illusions, or how he gets people to believe that he is speaking to the dead. And now we have, a little bit later in the story, Sophie has returned, has been escorted into this room by a maid who Home then gives a tip to that happened on the last page. And now we're at the point where they're having this conversation. And so, yeah. So Home is saying, I've been expecting you. She's been saying, you are a medium after all. And he's saying, I saw you from the window. And she's saying, then you've been waiting for me. Perhaps this is a mistake. And this is where we'll kind of continue coloring it. CB said, I'm going back and forth on projects right now. I'm working on Tengura, an undead-looking kaiju in post-apocalypse Japan. That sounds super fun. Kaiju are always fun. And he said, I'm trying to build up my Substack and revamp my YouTube channel. Awesome. That's cool. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I like the idea of a kaiju comic. That would be really fun to work on. I am basically working on this, and then as I kind of mentioned in the last stream, I have like some freelance stuff for some book covers for a publisher who does a lot of books on programming and hacking, and a lot of that consists of drawing robots, one of which will be an X-ray illustration, kind of similar to the illustration I did years ago called Puppet Checkup. And I have to get this page done before I can work on those, because I need to make sure that I'm kind of keeping progress on this crazy graphic novel. And then from there, I'm going to hopefully work on some illustrations. So, thus why I am up tonight. And all you can do is your best. This is something I'm starting to realize as I've gotten older. It's funny, my wife commented on this today because we had a roof leak in our house because it's been like crazy rainstorms and stuff in California for the last year. And I guess that started to have an impact on our little house's roof. And so we have a bit of a leak in the roof. And so now we're having to kind of go through with insurance and all of that stuff to kind of figure it out. And we're also trying to figure out, like, if this isn't covered, are we going to have the money to cover it and all that kind of stuff. And I just recently had a career change, so our budget's a lot tighter. Anyhow, this isn't a complaint. It's just an interesting thing where today, when all of this happened, it didn't really fluster me too much. And my wife was kind of mentioning that when I was younger, I used to get flustered by stuff like that. Like, I used to, if something like that happened that like disrupted my plans or our kind of plans for the future that was out of my control, I would get like frustrated by it and really mad at it. Situations like that. And now I think her observation was pretty dead on, where it's just kind of, it is what it is, and we just kind of deal with it. Like, there's not much you can do about things that are outside of your control. All you can do is your best. And I kind of feel like that's sort of the mentality you have to get into when it comes to art projects and stuff, because you just can't do everything all at once. And I know that for artists, it's like we're very ambitious people. Most artists, you know what? I'll put it this way. I'm not going to say all artists, because there's some artists that need more ambition. But let's just say for artists that have finished a book or a comic or something like that, I think that type of person is pretty driven and probably has a million projects they want to do. And I think it's kind of like you can go one way or the other with it, where you can be trying to kind of achieve everything and then just kind of hit like burnout, or you can just achieve what you can, do the best you can, and then just kind of roll with it. And that's kind of my mentality now. Whereas I think the younger me was, literally like, I'm going to do everything all at once. And that doesn't accomplish much more than the other perspective. All it does is kind of create frustration that I don't think is necessary. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was interesting to me that my wife mentioned that today, because I was like, oh yeah, I guess I have changed in that. I used to get a lot more easily frustrated when things didn't kind of work to plan, or like there were unexpected financial costs, or like hardships that kind of came out of nowhere, which by the way are frustrating, but it's just like more of a, I don't know, maybe it's like a maturity thing or something. You just get to an age where it's like, yeah, that stuff can't, there's not much you can do but what you can do, So yeah. CB said it's easy to get sidetracked, at least for me. Also, roof leaks are the worst. They can destroy your whole house. Yes. So yeah, Pepsi Cola in the chat said, good evening, all. I agree with your sentiment on you can just do your best and just keep on. Otherwise, I can just get bogged down in overthinking endless storylines, possibilities, and societal issues and solutions. Totally. Yeah. And I mean, even like, I think with political involvement or local stuff, or like, parenting, like friendships, all of that, the best you can do is the best you can do. And you push to do your best. And as long as you do your best, I don't think there's much you can do other than that. And, getting frustrated with your limits, is inevitable because that's just the cost of trying. I don't know if that makes sense, but you know, if you don't try, you're not going to get crazy frustrated because you'll just be like, it's kind of like a nihilistic way of viewing things. But I think the only thing you can do is your best try, and um, to get frustrated about being human is just kind of silly, and it's not productive. And then it usually generates stress. And I think at my age, I see people who do get like crazy frustrated, and a lot of them end up with like crazy health issues too. It doesn't bode well when when you can't just kind of roll with it, and your outlook can really start affecting your health. You know. So anyhow, I was glad that my wife pointed that out, and I also thought it was cool because I hadn't even thought of it, and that was a good sign because I'm like, okay, cool. I must have changed on that because it didn't even really cross my mind. Now, does that mean like I'm Mr. Zen and like I don't get frustrated? No, like I still like the other day I had to put up a towel rack in the house, and and like the previous owners of this place had like poorly patched the wall, so I'm like um putting in the I'm trying to think of what it's called. It's like a counter screw. It's like a screw you put in. I'm not a handyman type guy, but it's like a thing you put in, but that you then put the screw in. So it's almost like an anchor for the wall, and it screws right in. But then that whole portion of the wall just crumbles. It was like like a big hole, and I the funny thing is when I did that, of course I was like cussing a little bit because I'm like, great, now I got to go get a patch from Home Depot, and then I got to go do this, and I got to go do that, and this thing that would have taken like 10 minutes inevitably ends up taking like 2 hours to do. And it was a little frustrating. So it's not like I'm Mr. Zen or I'm like perfect, with this kind of thing. It's just that I think I've gotten better with kind of rolling with it, and not letting those things kind of bog me down, or also just kind of being more flexible with, and a lot of this might have to do with just being a parent where you just kind of inevitably have to do that. I think before being a parent, um, like when you don't have a kid, it's like you can kind of afford to not be flexible. You can be pretty rigid about stuff, but like when you have a kid, like let me think of a good example that's recent. Oh, I've got a good example that's recent, but first I want to pay attention to chat real quick. So remind me, chat, if I don't, if I that we're talking about parent stuff and flexibility. Okay. Um, Pepsi Cola said, "Sorry to hear about the leak, but cool to hear of the improved perspective. Mr. Zen just hides his frustration better than has none." And he said, "Yes, building furniture the wrong way 3 times over is my specialty. I can write, but never build efficiently." Yeah, I mean, I'm a writer and an artist. I'm not like a handyman. That stuff I kind of pick up, by necessity, and I'm not bad at. I'm not awful at it, but I'm not great at it. Um, but okay, so we were talking about the flexibility of like being a parent. So a good example, a couple days ago, I had a deadline for this client that I'm doing those book covers for, where I needed to get revisions done that night. And my work time is generally like my son goes to bed. We get him to bed by like 8:30 on weekdays, and it's a weekday, and so like we do everything, get him to bed. Um, it's like it ends up being a night where, because of like other stuff, we didn't end up getting time to read together, and we usually read together every night. and something came up. I can't remember, but anyhow, for some reason, we're having to do his bedtime like around 9 instead. And so my son ends up kind of wanting to read a book, and it's like 9 o'clock, and I'm like, dude, you need to get some sleep because you have like school tomorrow. And that's just genuine concern, you know. So anyhow, he gets tucked in. He gets, you know, he goes to sleep. I get everything fired up. I start working on these revisions that are due. I have to be up, you know, at like 6 in the morning or 7 in the morning the next day to go to work. Um, and so I'm gonna have to work late into the night. So I'm kind of eager to get this stuff done by like 1, hopefully to get some decent sleep. And then around 10, you know, my son, I hear him call me in, and like he's up and he's clearly bothered by, he's just been thinking about this book that he really wants me to read, and he wants to do book time. And I realized at that moment my kid just kind of missed me and he just wanted to hang out. And I was like, okay, so I just made the choice of like, all right, my stuff's just going aside. I'm going to sit down and read with this kid. And his bedtime, you know, we'll just make a pass on that for the night and just do reading and hang out for a little bit because my little guy needs attention. And and so I did that, and then it was like an hour later that I started my work and stuff, and I didn't get as much accomplished that night, but that's kind of a necessity because it's like he needed that to happen, and it happened. So it's like you make it happen, you know. It's kind of, I mean, that's a very small example, but I was just saying that's like from 2 days ago, you know, and that's pretty much not that exact one, but that's kind of the experience of being a parent. Is a lot of the time you have to kind of set whatever your plans are aside because something came up that's different, or you have to deal with like immediate stuff. And sometimes it's way more serious than that. Sometimes it's lighthearted stuff like that. Um, and I think that's good. I know it's weird, but I think it's good to have to do that because I think sometimes when we hold too rigidly to plans or intentions or anything like that, you know, it just again leads to like frustrating things or frustration or um I don't know. It's kind of weird, but like flexibility is very nice. It's been a nice thing for me to learn, you know. And keep in mind, I'm a cartoonist, so it's like, you know, I think a lot of us cartoonists like control and like having control over our own worlds. That's half of why, you know, writers and artists like making stuff is the ability to like craft something that has intention and structure and you know, maybe not for everybody, but most cartoonists I know kind of on an art level like really enjoy the sort of full control. Animators too, you know, the full control over a little world that you're able to build. um and I mean it's a different experience than, you know, like group projects are fun, and group projects have a different kind of joy to them. But but yeah, it's interesting. Pepsi Cola said, as a single person raised by a single mom, it amazes me how parents balance work, leisure, and kids. Does the lack of time to work on your art help you focus and create more efficiently? I think the lack of time makes you appreciate time, and you get a better perspective. I mean, you know, of course, I'm a little biased, but I feel like for my, you know what, I'll just speak for myself because I think that'll be less bias if I just speak for myself. For me, parenting has made me less selfish in ways that I didn't even realize when I was single and didn't have kids. Like when I was single, I didn't realize how much time I had. I felt like my life was like fully taxed. I felt like I was at my capacity, and and I felt like I was really giving and a very good person. And then I became a parent and I realized like how many things I did in my life that just kind of served me. And you know, you have to give a lot of those things up. like especially the first few years, and or just expand them to kind of include others, and it's been a really a good growing experience. The 10 years that I've been doing it, um, but it's been really interesting because as a journey, it's made me more flexible. It's made me more efficient with my time, yeah, for sure, because you only get windows. So like, it's hard to explain, but it's like before having my son, it's like I worked really hard on comics, but I'm not sure how hard I worked on comics. I mean, I was working really hard on them. I made some, but it's like, but like for the amount of time I had, I didn't get a lot accomplished, like in comics. Um, Whereas, like, I think when you have like 1 or 2 hours a day, that are when it's not the weekend, maybe 4 or 5 if you stay up super late, it really makes you have to be comfortable. Well, it's one or two things. You either have to give the thing up, or you have to be more efficient with your time, and really, like, when you get your window to sit down and work, you can't afford to be like, oh, I'm just not feeling it, I'll watch a movie. Like, that kind of thing becomes less and less of a thing because you just can't, like, and I do think it makes you more efficient with your time. So, not that it's all like rainbows and stuff. I think there are benefits for people who don't, choose to have kids or whatever. But for me, it's been a net positive on who I am, and stuff like that. I don't know if that makes sense. But you definitely realize, like, you had time. That's the funny thing. You could probably talk to almost any person who's a new parent, and they'll be really open about that, like how they felt like they never had time, and now they're like, oh my gosh, I had so much time. What did I do with it? And I'm kind of imagining maybe that's how it's going to be when we're older too, where it's like, now we're like, oh, like whatever, and we're thinking something's a big deal, and then you're like 80 years old and you're like, that wasn't a big deal. Like, I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, perspectives always shift, I think. um and it's kind of fun, I feel like it all kind of leads to a place of I don't know, it's hard to say. I think maybe less judgment, because like the older I get, the more, I start thinking like weird circumstances have a lot to do with things, like more than I think I wanted to think when I was younger. And so there's things, really positive things that have happened to me in my life, but a lot of those are kind of like luck, and I had hard work involved. But um the older I get, the more I'm like, I don't know how much of that was was my work, or just like right place, right time, or it's interesting to say the least. So yeah. Anyhow, rambling and getting all waxing all philosophical about this stuff. So what we're doing now is just kind of trying to keep the lighting on this kind of working. I think I want to exaggerate it a bit. And Pepsi Cola said, I remember saying I felt old at 15, like 100 years old. Now at 30, I realized I was lying to myself at 15. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny because when I was 30, I remember looking at 20-year-olds, especially early 20s and late teens, and just being like, man, these are kids, like, what are they doing? Yeah. And then, and even looking at myself and being like, man, I would hate, like, it's funny, like, some people paint this as a negative, but I don't think this is a negative. Where some people will say, like, if the teenage me met the current me, even if they thought what you were doing was cool or something like that, they'd probably hate you. Like they probably think like, yeah, this guy's all right, but like, the hell do they know? And because you change so much in life, but it's funny because that changes every time. So it's like, there's a lot of things, you know, at my uh, there's a lot of things I thought when I was a teenager that I don't think now, and there are a lot of things I thought as a 20-year-old that I don't think now. But now it's funny because now I'll talk to like people who are 30 because I'm in my 40s now, and it's like I'll talk to people who are 30 and I'll be like, kid, you'll see. So it is funny how that shifts, and it's like there's things I thought I had figured out in my 30s that now I kind of know better. Although I do feel like there's a big game change in your 30s. Because to me, the most significant change in my perspective happened in my 30s, where I went from being very like, I've talked to people about this, like your 40s are awesome, 30s are pretty awesome. 20s 20s are fun, but it's like there's so much anxiety in your 20s. Um, I feel like there's a lot of like insecurity and like proving yourself um and figuring things out. And then I do think your 30s are kind of establishing career and that kind of stuff. But it's like, but it is kind of an interesting thing. I like late 30s and 40s where you're just kind of like, you are where you are. You're hoping to achieve more and do great things and stuff like that. But you kind of know who you are, and you kind of know your foibles and your strengths, and you don't have much to prove, which is nice. I kind of like that. So giving less of a crap about anything, which is kind of nice. Like I care about things, but it's just like interesting how much different things have got, and more kind of relaxed and chill things get, even when they're intense. Pepsi Cola said, "Wild recently turned 30. It's hard to accept that the 90s were not 20 years ago." Oh, for me, it's bizarre to see the 90s thing. There's this whole resurgence of like the 90s with kids, and I think that's some of it's cool, but then some of it is just baffling to me. Like some of the styles that are coming back. Some of them I like love, but some of them in the 90s I hated, and like they're back, and I'm like, no. Um, a good example of that's like new metal. Like I never liked new metal, and I'm not a big new metal guy, and I wasn't at the time. We kind of like I was in a band and we hated that stuff, and like it was kind of popular, I guess, at the time, but like there's a whole contingent of people who were not into that. But it's funny because I think now if they did like a movie about like the late 90s, it'd be like all about like new metal, and everybody would be like, yeah, new metal, man, yeah. And it's like, no. um that's interesting because it gives you this interesting perspective. Yeah, Pepsi Cola said a completely wild party city has blockbuster worker costumes and CD player and cassette props. Yeah, I mean, I think that's inevitable. There's some interesting things too. Like I was talking to somebody the other day who's a younger person, like I in my mind younger, but like they're like 20s. Um, but they were talking about hippies, and they said something about hippies, like yeah, they like listen to reggae. Like I was like, wait, what? Like, so they had this whole picture in their mind of like reggae listening hippies in the 60s, and then the style of this hippie was like Janis Joplin. And I was like, wait, what are you talking about? It was the most bizarre kind of version of history I had heard of, because I was like, I know some people who are like, especially, like more hippie types that might have like partaken in reggae, but reggae was like a totally different thing. That was a different scene, especially in the 60s. And it's like just such an interesting, weird perspective, but it kind of makes sense, and it made me realize like that's probably what I sounded like when I was talking to my parents or like older people about like punk rock in the 70s. Like, what did I know about punk in the, like, or like rock and roll in the 50s and 60s? Like, technically, I might have known more in a way, because with history, you get to read more, and when people are experiencing something, they may not have like the broader perspective, but then at the same time, you're going to get so many things just like wildly inaccurate, where you're like, man, all hippies wore bell bottoms or something, and maybe that was like a fashion that like half the people at the time were just like, I hate those freaking pants. But then like in the biopic or whatever, everyone in the 60s will be wearing like, bell bottoms. It's like, that's just what it becomes. Um, similar to like 80s stuff, where like suddenly everyone in an 80s movie is wearing like neon. And it's like, nah, not everybody in the 80s wore that stuff. Like some people did. I think Stranger Things did an okay job at like not resorting to too many of those kind of things. Like feel like they're pretty good. Um, at least they're a little closer to kind of the variety that existed at the time. Although they fall into tropes too. Pepsi Cola said, to be fair, in high school we had 80s week, and collectively we just disco, big hair, and rock. Vague Google image concepts. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I mean, we had like disco, like 70s, 60s throwbacks in high school too. So it's kind of the cycle. That's what I guess I'm getting at, is like you definitely start seeing that. You start seeing things return that you thought had died a death, you know, like new metal. Some which maybe you thought justifiably was out of vogue and would never return. Anyhow, that's a rant, old man rant there. All right, so we are getting a little further on this page, and we're trying to kind of establish this scene. And a lot of this style and technique just takes a little bit of time and a lot of masking and patience. But it's a little quicker than like a full render would be. I don't know if that makes sense. Okay. We have her arm here. Oh, nice. Pepsi Cola said, your art is incredible, by the way. Recently got 2 stories and Jacob's apartment. Thanks for picking those up. That's cool. I'm glad you checked them out. Oh, nice. And he said he caught me on Philip Chandler's channel, and we got him back into comics. That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. That's really exciting. Yeah, Philip's a good dude. A pretty amazing artist in his own right, Yeah, comics are weird. They're like the comics are interesting. They're like an addiction, but like in a good way, It's like, I don't know. But I do joke with people that especially when it comes to like making comics, I feel like sometimes I wonder if I'm like a bad drug dealer where I'm like, hey, what's great? This comics thing, and then people do it and it like ruins their life, because it's time consuming, there's not a ton of money in it. but I like to think that it's a little more than that. Like I like to think, we had Dave Baker on the show a little bit ago, and Dave is a really good advocate for the idea that comics are the best medium, and he makes a really strong case for it. I think I might have frozen. Okay, I froze for a second there. Let's see. Okay, it finally, I think it caught up. There's just been lags on this stream. Hopefully you guys are hearing okay. Dave is a really good advocate for the idea that like comics are the best medium. And it's like I actually kind of agree with that. Like I feel like the potential of comics is really intriguing and I think still relatively unexplored. And it's fun to play in that playground because it is relatively new for an art form, even though it's like the oldest art form known to man. It's also like the newest art form, and it's kind of fun in that way. Where I feel like, you know, I mean, you could make the argument that like hieroglyphs and hieroglyphics were comics, and that like early ancient Roman murals and stuff were comics, uh, um, the origin of the word story. I think Spiegelman makes that argument about the origin of the word story came from decorations that were sequential images telling a story or a narrative on the story of a building. And so that's why they called them stories, because like why they call the levels of a building stories, because they were divided by the stories. So it's like the very language wrapped in our like building structures is kind of um, built around comics and iconographic sequential narratives. So it is like technically like the oldest. You could make the argument, you could posit a really strong argument that it's the oldest art form is comics. And you can also make the argument that, yeah, it's very unexplored. So there's still things that haven't been tried in comics. So it's pretty cool. Oh, nice. Pepsi Cola said no audio lag, at least. That's good. And then he said, I hadn't conceptualized the depth it takes to make comics, but I write, but comic artists write, direct, lighting, camera crew, set design, etc. You guys are wild but talented. Thank you. And then he said, honestly, I didn't realize graphic novels existed outside of superhero concepts. Like you working on a historical fiction of a classical poet. Random yet dope. Yeah, that's the part of comics that I think needs more exploration. And there's a lot of it. There's a lot out there. It's like the beauty of comics is there's more out there than you realize of like indie stuff. Enough to where, just when you think you're getting a hold of it, go to a good indie friendly convention and you'll be overwhelmed with the amount of work that's out there. And then from talking to other indie creators, you'll find out there's like this whole world of, stuff. Or maybe you start getting all the indie stuff in the US and then you get introduced to like French comics and like it just becomes something where you couldn't possibly know all the stuff that's out there, but at the same time, it's still relatively unexplored. So, and a lot of the stuff that hits the mainstream, it's really like it's kind of like a lot of the book section has been dominated by like mystery and thriller and suspense, and there hasn't been as much in the bookstore. Like imagine if like hardly any like less writers were exploring nonfiction or literary stuff. And so it's kind of neat to see that as like a almost like blank slate where we can paint and make really cool stuff. At the same time, like also realizing there is probably a whole world of comics out there that are indie that are hitting those notes that like we have yet to read or discover, and that's a lot of fun. It's a very exciting thing. Pepsi Cola said, I wish bookstores had a better diverse comic section, like comics based on genre rather than publishers. Not sure how I missed the diversity of comics since I spent so much time in bookstores. Well, I know how you missed it because like they don't. Bookstores don't have as much. Some do. I shouldn't say all, but quite often they'll just kind of, up until like a few years ago, they really used to just kind of throw comics all in the same section. So you'd go and like, in a weird way, it'd be broken down by like genre with like every other kind of book. But then when it gets to comics, it's like broken down by publisher. So it's like, here's our Marvel section, here's our Image section, here's our DC section, or it's just all of them lumped together with like back in the weird room with like the Dungeons and Dragons books, and it's like, the nice thing to see is like there's been a little bit of expansion in that, like a lot of bookstores are really expanding and starting to carry more like literary comics. A lot of comic book stores are starting to expand and carry that kind of stuff. There's a lot that have been doing that for years, and are just like really weird, quirky shops, But but it's nice to see that starting to happen. And the exciting part is a lot of it's happening in the kids book section, which is really cool. So you really are starting to see in the children's book section like graphic novels that are by like genre, and that's really cool. It's like hopefully that'll lead the way for the adult stuff. But I do feel like when it comes to comics for kids, there's been like massive progress in the last few years. I feel like the game for graphic novels and young adults that door has been cracked wide open and is really expanding and growing, and it's really exciting to see because it's a great medium for kids. It's a great medium for adults though too, and I feel like unfortunately a lot of the stuff, because there's so much money in the kids market, I think a lot of the stuff that's for adults kind of gets lost by the wayside. And Pepsi Cola very rightly said it's a great way to teach um, kids and those who prefer visual medium. Yeah, I agree. My publisher for Jacob's Apartment, Graphic Mundi, a lot of what they published too, how they started initially was publishing medical books that were comics because they had a couple really prominent people in the medical field that did studies and stuff and realized that the graphic novel was kind of like the perfect medium to talk about like complicated visual things that you're trying to teach. And so it was initially like a medical thing where they were making, you know, materials that people could learn about, amputation or like something like, heavy in the history of medicine that requires a lot of visuals. They just were like, let's do it in comics because it's way better. And then they've since expanded to like tell human stories. Um, but a lot of it started with this whole movement in like biomedical comics, which I think is a really smart idea because it is. I think it's a very superior form of for visual training and stuff. But I think that the art form itself is like a literary thing. Has been explored a bit, but I feel like that just hasn't quite taken off as much. – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – again, like the kids book market is starting to expand into that too, which is really, really fascinating and cool to see. But it's not like there hasn't been literary exploration, you know. I mean, Mouse like is a really good example. That's been around for a long time, and you know, I think did that get the Pulitzer or the Nobel? I think it's the I can't remember. Oh my gosh, it's weird that I can't remember. But it won one of those. I think probably the Nobel. I can't remember. I'd have to Google it. But there's a million great, literary comics out there. Um, but I feel like it's been around for a while, and there has been credit given. Gene Yang's a really good example of like a literary work. I haven't seen it yet, but I heard there's like a TV series now based on American Born Chinese, and that's one of my favorite graphic novels. Um, but I heard that like Disney Plus was doing it. I don't know if that's launched yet, but very literary stuff, and like so it's like I don't know, it's expanding, but again, it's exciting because it's relatively new still. Okay, we have been going for about an hour, so I'm going to play a trailer. And when I get back, we will continue to work this out. And I think I need to create a little more contrast here before I play that trailer. I want to create some contrast so this really stands out. So I feel like it's starting to blend equally and doesn't need to. So yeah, we're gonna get into finishing the rest of this shading for the page. But in the meantime, we're also going to, let me make it a little darker here too. Okay. So in the meantime, we'll play that trailer, and I think since Philip was mentioned, maybe we'll play the trailer by Philip Chandler, who I haven't seen in a bit. I hope Philip's doing okay. All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit save, and then we will get back to working on this in a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and play the trailer by Philip Chandler, and we'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Phil Chandler. I'm a freelance artist, illustrator, and cartoonist. Today, though, however, I want to tell you about a graphic novel I picked up recently called Jacob's Apartment. This book was both written and beautifully illustrated by Joshua Kemble. It is the story of a doomed romance that causes the main character to question his beliefs and his faith, while he's also going through other tragedies in his life. Every page has been illustrated by hand and digitally colored with painstaking detail. It is an emotional story that causes you to think and even question things in your own life. And while the story is a tragedy, it is one that I was completely entertained by and I highly recommend. You can currently find this on Amazon or even check in with your local bookstore and see if you can order it. And while you're at it, you can also check out my Instagram at Phil Chandler Arts and also my YouTube channel by the same name, Phil Chandler Arts. And go buy Jacob's Apartment.
But I think that inevitably, talking about the comics thing, there is the problem that people want a passive experience. So kind of like walking into a theater and just kind of getting their dinner and being able to just kind of relax and have the play kind of play out for them. Um, and I understand it. Like like a lot of what I consume, is like a lot of entertainment I consume will be while I'm working on comics or while I'm working, and so it'll just be audio stuff, and it's just kind of playing out before me. It's not an interactive thing. It's more just like a passive thing. And whereas like books and comics, um, well, comics in particular, because books, a novel you can read or you can listen to being read, right? But a comic, it's not like somebody can just read you a comic. I mean, they kind of can, but it's like it doesn't work like an audiobook. It's reliant on visuals, and it doesn't work on like a movie that just kind of plays and you just watch. It's like a very interactive thing where you really have to read it as a book or as an ebook or whatever way you're kind of reading it. And so it's sort of hard to have read to you. I guess you could kind of think like like an audiobook with visuals on YouTube or something could be like a passive version of a comic, where it goes like I did a couple trailer videos of the first chapter of two stories where I read it and it kind of goes panel through panel. And that kind of gives you the experience, but you still miss the whole thing that is comics, where you have the panels and the page themselves and everything's kind of working together to kind of advance the story. And so even when you start breaking it down to like panel by panel, you're like missing some of the page design and elements. So I think at its fullest, and purest, I guess, comics are a really active reading experience where you have to read the thing, and you have to kind of sit down with it, and it requires a little bit of work from you. Whereas I think other experiences in media can kind of translate to a passive experience a little better. Now, I will also agree with the argument that listening to an audiobook is not quite the same as reading it. It's just I don't think it digests as well, because I've listened to plenty of audiobooks. In fact, most of the book reading I do nowadays is audiobooks, because like when am I going to have the time to read a book? I'm halfway through my friend Dave Baker's book, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant, but it's like I'm not going to be through that graphic novel for a while, because it's very active and it requires like time to like sit down and really focus on it. I think that inevitably is going to alienate a good percentage of people, because I think um, a lot of people in society want very passive entertainment experiences. They want to kind of get on the ride and just kind of go, like and so I think that comics have an uphill battle in that sense with with culture that wants passive entertainment, that wants to kind of sit back and have it told to them. And again, because of comics like kind of being so reliant on people being active and like reading it, and physically like holding the book or reading the PDF or whatever way they're reading it, I think that makes it uniquely in a challenging situation, which doesn't make it a lesser medium. It just makes it less palatable to the masses. That's my kind of theory on it. Pepsi Cola said, agreed, sort of like the rise of short form content like shorts and TikTok. I think that's a good example, because I think long form content kind of requires engagement. And keep in mind, man, I listen to YouTube videos. I enjoy shorts. Sometimes I do like seeing a short little video that's funny. Some of my favorite YouTubers do like little short skits, um, or short bits, or like just little snippets and stuff, and they're easily digestible, and they're stuff you can kind of mix into the day. And they're still an art form in themselves. It's just, like I was just explaining why I think comics have a bit of an uphill battle getting kind of like popular with the masses, because again, It's like unlike a film or a movie where you can just put it on, have it on in the background. It's like comics you can't have on in the background. Like you have to have in the foreground to really enjoy them, I think. So it's interesting. Pepsi Cola said long form betrayer. I do the same thing. But I will say my preference is usually longer videos that I can have running and kind of again, like, you know, I like part of why I do these streams is because I really enjoy the idea of kind of hanging out with other artists when we're working. And I know that when I'm working, I like to have, you know, art streams or like long form streams with interesting conversations on, because it's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like hanging out in the studio. But I do think that passive and active thing is a real battle for comics to, you know, that I don't think it's a battle that comics should win. Like my point being, I feel like comics would fail to be comics if they were too passively digestible. I think comics require action and attention. But if done right, it's like active but seamless, you know? Um, but again, sometimes, you know, you want like I just I've been rewatching some episodes of Maxwell or Get Smart. And Get Smart used to be on Nick at Night back in the day, reruns of it. And I loved that show as a kid. And it was like a week ago or two that I was thinking about Get Smart. And I was telling my wife about it. She'd never seen it. It's like, oh my gosh, we got to watch. And I'm not talking about like, I think there was like a or a movie or some spinoff of that recently. Well, I guess by recently, maybe like 10 years ago. But I'm talking about like the original television show. And yeah, I've been watching some of those episodes every once in a while, and that's been a lot of fun, you know. And that's like not wildly active. um, Pepsi Cola said, "I like to think Sophocles would ramble in public for hours, and then on his lunch break, another philosopher would do a short-term rant. The balance." That's a good point. Well, and to be honest, like the thing about like philosophers in their heyday, you know, it's like man, if you read some of the dialogues between, you know, authority figures and early philosophers, it's like it's amazing how many philosophers in the history of philosophy were dangling over a fire, like they were pissing off so many people that it was like inevitable that they were going to get martyred, you know. um that seems like the longer history of philosophy is like people throwing out an idea that somebody like, you know, people find interesting, they want to talk about, but then when they sit down and talk with the person, it challenges their assumptions so much they get pissed off and want to kill them. And you know, I don't know. So I don't know, maybe society hasn't like gone to a point where it's like, you know, changed that much. I think there are just things in the humanities. Yeah, Pepsi Cola was saying, yeah, I bet they were brave, or like me, just can't stay quiet. Yeah, I can't stay quiet. That's my problem. I ramble. And I think while I talk. And so there's like, that's not necessarily the best thing. I think the better philosophers, you know, even when they pissed people off, they were a little smarter with like very wisely choosing their words and stuff. Whereas like I think very much out loud. Um, and so for me, it's like stream of consciousness is a pretty easy thing to do because it's like that's my brain. My brain is like constantly just thinking as I'm speaking. Like it, you know, I think out loud. Which is not the best I don't know if that's the greatest quality, but yes, I wouldn't be able to not uh, ramble about this stuff if I had to. Nice. Pepsi Cola said we ramble or we speculate. Rambles are the jazz of life. I agree. I like jazz. I like jazzy conversations. I like the beats a lot too. I was really into the beats. I had my whole Kerouac stage and stuff where I read On the Road and desired to kind of go hitchhiking across America. What's funny to me is I don't know if Corey Kerr ever read On the Road, but he's one of the few guys I know who actually did do the whole like wild hitchhiking thing. I think that's funny. But Corey from the Artcasters did like a whole search for meaning in his youth, where he got on like a motorcycle and hung out with like hobos and like hitchhiked and did all this like wild stuff. And it's kind of interesting that he went through that whole thing, and yet I don't think he read On the Road by Kerouac, which is interesting because I think that book inspired most people to do what Corey had done, but he just did that of his own volition. And I think strangely, like really influenced by Herman Melville. Corey, if you're watching this after the fact, you can chime in and correct me, man. So we're kind of getting there. Again, it's like a push and pull, Pepsi Cola said Corey is an impressive madman. Yeah, I think Corey's amazing. But that's the thing that I realize about comics is like I think that it makes sense that the comics that get popular sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes and quite frequently are going to be like the lowest common denominator comics because they're less active, even though they're active. So they're still active. They're still requiring active reading. But it's like, you got to think like how much time investment is it for somebody to read an issue of like Superman versus sitting down and reading like Mouse or sitting down and reading like a Chris Ware comic. It's like it's just way less required of you, and that's not to knock like superhero stuff, because there's some great superhero stuff out there, but even the better superhero stuff like Watchmen, if you're going to read Watchmen, it's hard to read casually. That's a heavy book. It's a little harder to read than like I don't know, my son was really into the Sonic the Hedgehog stuff that IDW was putting out, and that stuff's like a real fast read. It's fun, it's well executed, but it's like super fast, pretty easy. You can kind of do it in an hour, maybe less, you know. And it's still a crazy time investment for the artists who make it, but you know what I mean? Like it's a little different of a proposition, even for like young adult stuff, right? Like how much more time does it take to read like American Born Chinese than it does to read, Dogman, and I love Dogman. I've spoken really highly of those Dogman books. I think they're brilliant. I think they're great. I think they're doing great things for comics, and I think Dave Pilkey is hilarious. But like reading Dogman is not going to be as much of a time investment as like, a Gene Yang book, So again, it just kind of makes sense. Yeah, Pepsi Cola said like a gateway comic drug. Yeah, I feel like that's what Dogman is. It's a good one. And I like that he explores things that are kind of interesting. Like there's a comic he made called Cat Kid Comic Club, where it's like comics within a comic. These characters in it are little kids that are making comics, and then the comics are of like all kinds of styles, like haiku comics and like clay comics and comics that are made out of like cardboard and like stick figure comics and like realistic comics. And it's a really cool like introduction to kids to just show like the variety of what comics can do. And yet it's also still kind of Dave Pilkey, silly and wild, Let's see here. So I think we'll stream until about 1. So hopefully I can finish the shading. We're going to stream till I finish the shading, hopefully, on this. But if I don't finish the shading on this by 1, we're just going to cut it. Because I don't want to destroy myself for tomorrow. There was a time where I would do these streams like wildly long, till like 4 in the morning or something. But I feel like those days are not quite doable anymore. And again, it's like a lot of it's just about like getting older and wiser, where I'm like, I have to kind of pick my resources, like, is that worth the next day burnout, to kind of get a bunch done tonight? But it is hard to fight that, because that is in my guts, and my soul is like working late at night into the early morning. If I were left to my own devices, that would be the times that I work all the time. I wonder how I would have survived in a world without electricity. Because I'm such a night owl. It's bizarre to think what that would be like if I had to work by like candlelight into the wee hours or something. But I have to fight that instinct now that I'm a little older. Pepsi Cola said, I met you as a fellow night owl. I try to see the sun and live with the living. Try. Almost there. Comics by candlelight. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I do like working. And again, nighttime's my working hours, but there is a time once it's morning where I need to call it for my own, health. Okay, so we're gonna do, like, the nice thing is at least this panel was fairly quick. Now, I was being overly ambitious and thinking like, oh, I'm gonna get this whole thing shaded and colored by the day, but I don't think that's gonna happen. I think what we're gonna do is get through the shading. But we did finish a panel. So we only have 3 panels left, which is very exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and condense these down, these shades. And I always feel like a good indication of whether your tones are on is whether they're kind of reading without line. And I feel like these are reading pretty well without line. So that's a good sign to me that that these are kind of getting there. There is one thing I want to add that I feel is kind of weak on this. I still want to put a little more contrast back here, because I feel like there's too much brightness behind home. And I feel like I want that to really be a little more contrasty behind home and the couch. Let's see if that works. Again, I'm doing this on a new layer, so if it doesn't work, I can kind of pull it back out, but I think it will work. That's what my instincts are saying. There's still something kind of slightly missing on this panel. I think that might be the thing. I don't like that halo thing that started to happen there. There we go. Now it's starting to work a little bit. Yeah, I like that much better because I think that creates a little more of the room and also just creates a little more contrast with him. So I'll look at it without and with. And now I kind of want to tone it back a little bit behind the word balloon too. Just slightly. So it's like less prominent because I don't want people's attention heavily in that like one spot. Okay. Now we're getting there. Okay, so I'm going to save. Nice. Pepsi Cola said hit the eject button when needed. That's a good way of putting it, is hitting the eject button. They also said the zoom out is fascinating, the way miniature details blend to make such a finely detailed image. Thanks. All right, so we are going to. Oh, wait, there's one other thing I want to hit before we play another ad. And that is, I want this to get just slightly darker. Make sure I'm on a new layer. I am. I just want to go a little darker so there's a little more depth to this face, but without kind of making it look too like wild. But I think it can go a little more bold here. And then I think we'll pull back a little bit after I've added that in. Even her eye, because I think if I slightly shade this eye that's back here, it will actually look a little more convincing. Okay. And I don't know why the shortcut to go to like the eraser as well as the brush, it's like you hit E and it just defaults back to the brush. It's really weird. That's been an issue on like the last 3 versions of Photoshop. And I wonder if that's a common thing or if that's just my keyboard or something. But it's like I'll hit E and it'll go to the eraser and then bounce back to the brush. Okay, that's getting closer, but now I kind of want to pull it back a little bit. Oh, this is a problem. Adobe Creative Cloud is needed to resolve this problem. And it's saying something about repair. That's a little disturbing. Why am I getting that? That doesn't make any sense. Repair. Oh, no. I don't think you guys are seeing this this thing that just popped up on my screen that says Adobe Creative Cloud is required to solve this problem. That's really scary. Okay, I think we're good. That was a little scary. Wow, I don't know why that popped up. Oh, come on. Now it's saying initializing installer. I don't understand this. Why would it do that when it's in the middle of this? Okay, I'm gonna try to save and see if it'll let me save it. It's not letting me save. Oh, that's a problem. Pepsi Cola said the worst part of current technology is every 2-week updates. I was fine with the original system. Stop trying to change me. Well, I wasn't expecting an update that I'd have to do during stream. I really don't want to do, and I just wanted to just save what I've got, but now it's like not. It's just like frozen. So if I go to, oh, there we go. Okay, yes. Oh, thank God. Okay, I was able to hit save. This is good. This is good. Although it is saying saving 0%. So, oh, thank God. Okay, I was able to save. So whatever update it's doing in the background, which is good news. So there's one thing I wanted to do before We'll see if it gets all the way to saved. Yeah, Pepsi Cola said theoretical few. Yeah. Whew. Okay, so we're gonna get a little bit of this extra erased now, I thought. Oh, I was on the wrong layer. Try it. Maybe? Oh, maybe it can't. Let's see what's going on here. Okay. There it is. Okay, good. Okay, I think we're going to go here and just erase a little bit. Just kind of bring it back a tiny bit. And then here, oh, that was a little too much. I actually think it needs to be here. And then we'll go back to just add a little bit of shadow here. I think that'll be enough. So now I'm going to go ahead and call that panel done. And now we will play a trailer and we'll move on to the other panels. So here is, let's see, let's do Wordzoid.
Well, Peter, since I'm such a big music fan, I'm going to have to go with Karen Carpenter. Oh, Stu, I'm sorry. That's the incorrect answer. Trish, what you got for us?
I'm gonna go with Kim Gordon.
All right, let's check that answer. Kim Gordon. Do we have a Kim Gordon? Yes, and that means you're our new Wordzoid champion, Trish. Dale, tell Trish what she's won. Trish, you've won a copy of 2 stories, a memoir of faith and mental illness. Handwritten, hand-drawn, and handed to you by artist and writer Joshua Kemble. But wait, that's not all. You've also won a copy of Jacob's Apartment, the story of a doomed romance. What happens when you take Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and put it in a blender with Ghost World? You get Jacob's Apartment, written and illustrated by Joshua Kemble. Trish, thank you for playing Wordzoid.
All right, great job, Trish.
I was told I was gonna get a lifetime supply of paper towels.
Pepsi Cola asked and said, the different layers are something I don't quite understand. Why is there a separate separation rather than building upon one layer? So I'm making new layers. So that's why. So it's like I'm kind of, I can work on one layer, but I can also work on multiple layers. And so the nice thing about that is, like, let's say I wanted to add some more shadow, and then I'm like, oh, I don't like that. I can erase it and not have an effect on the layer below it. So it's just a way I like to work when doing this. You don't have to work this way, but layers is like the big trick with Photoshop. So the nice thing about that is you can have, like all of these lines and stuff like that can be on separate layers, and then I can do color underneath. So it's kind of like almost like onions. I don't know if that makes sense. Pepsi Cola said 10 out of 10 ads, by the way. Cheers to your artistic friends. Well, that last one was by Jim Lujan, who is a genius and like an amazing animator. And he sent me 2 ads, and I've loved each one of them. He's just like, I've been a fan of his for years, and a friend of his for quite a while now too. Gosh, we must have known each other for about a decade now, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, like I've been lucky enough to do a voice for one of his actually two of his cartoons. One that hasn't been released yet, and then I've also been fortunate enough to have him make me some commercials, which is just incredible. So yeah, the day you get like a Jim Lujan cartoon original sent to you as just like a hey, here's a cool thing I made for you is like, I don't know, that was one of the most flattering things somebody's done for me. But yeah, Jim is really funny. He's just released an album today, so on I'm blanking out on the name of it, but it's very funny. It's oh my gosh, I can't even remember the name of the guy. There's a country album. It's the latest video post on Jim's channel, so Jim Lujan Animation on YouTube. And I will probably plug it when I stream tomorrow, and we're able to kind of check it out. But it's really funny. It's like he actually has two albums that he just put out. They're like fake band albums, and they're incredible. It's like one of them is like funk, and it's like a funky soul, like let's get it on, girl kind of music. And then the other is like this country America guy, and they're both like incredible. It's just hilarious, like really great. That's it, American Fist Livingstone. So it's that will crack you up. It's very funny. And like the great thing about Jim's stuff, I was saying this to my wife because I was telling her about this America Fist Livingstone album because it was making me laugh pretty hard. And I was like, man, Jim is so funny. But the thing that's neat about Jim that I feel is like part of his artistic genius is he has this like strange and unique ability to pick the strangest characters, like if you were on a road trip, right, and you had to stop at like a strange spot in the US and like fill up for gas, and it's like a weird creepy truck stop out in the middle of nowhere with like weird curios and stuff at like a shop and like weird souvenirs, and for some reason it's like that store that has like they're selling like way too many knives like and lighters, and it's like that kind of culture, but Jim can like inhabit that and like be so like observant. Like it's interesting. He like as a creative can kind of live in these odd spaces of the person who goes to Walmart at 4 a.m, you know, like, or like a strange trailer park, you know, that where you feel a little weird, um, or just like a weird part of town, you know, that you end up in, like, or you know, like a strange stop along the road. It's like he picks these strange characters that and then like very empathetically creates humor about them, you know, but it's not like it goes a little beyond parody. I don't know if that makes sense because he's like pretty authentically telling stories in these weird little worlds, you know, that are like the Luhan verse. But I think it's just amazing. Yeah, Pepsi Cola was saying only sell shirts with bald eagles on it. 100% like that. That's the feeling of the Jim Lujan world, you know. Um, or like the car show, or like the convention. Like another example of like Jim Lujan is like if you've ever ended up at like a weird convention and there's just odd salespeople all around and you're not quite sure what's going on. Like that's a Jim Lujan cartoon. It's like it's great. I love it. He just kind of picks outcasts and outskirts. Like if Jim Lujan were filming in LA, he wouldn't film in LA. He'd film in like Silver Lake or like areas around LA. He'd pick, you know, um, Lakewood instead of Long Beach, you know? I don't know if that makes sense. It's like It's just I guess that's very California specific. But my point is he would pick like the kind of the weird spot, not the main spot. Um, yeah. Yeah. Pepsi Cola was saying semi culty, semi corporate. Yeah. And like cults too. Like, I mean, if Jim's going to do a story, it's rarely going to be about like, um, like the big cult. It'll be about the strange cult, like that's kind of on the outskirts. Um, yeah. I don't know. I always love that about his stuff. But even when he writes music, he'll do it about the, like a strange man who seems to get in fights all the time, um, and loves America and falls in love with people at truck stops. It's like that's kind of like a character that Jim decides I'm going to make an album written by this guy. I just think it's great. Or like the love obsessed, sugar daddy guy who's probably not like really all that successful at it. I don't know if that makes sense. It's just it's the best. It's the best. I can't wait to see him do the full fungus, which is Jim's delving into the world of underground jazz and jazz legends. It's just fun. His work's great. Yeah, Pepsi Cola said someone has to give a spotlight on these oddities. Humor makes them more digestible. Yeah, and I just love his ability to inhabit those characters and just really like. There's something really fun if you ever get the opportunity to like talk to Jim or like you just catch one of his live streams. There's something really fun about hearing him talk about his characters. Like when Jim talks about his characters, they're like real people. Like he knows everything about them. like he knows like where they went to school, who their best friend was, like when their first kiss was. Like he's just got it down, and it's great. It's just I love it. I love his imagination and ability to just inhabit these wild characters. Yeah, it's great. And the great thing is he's like that in person. Like you could be sitting at a restaurant and he'll just like start speculating about the history of a strange character you see at the restaurant. And it's like they'll give you their whole backstory. It's great. The passion for the weird is fantastic. Yeah. Let's see here. We're getting there, guys. Yeah, it's looking like we're not going to finish the shading for the entire thing because it's already 12:30. So I'm guessing at best I'm going to get the shading done for this one panel, which honestly is not a bad amount of progress. Not quite where I wanted to be, but not terrible. There's a little bit of an awkwardness to some of the shading here. I'm not sure where that bleeding... there it is. There's a little bit of bleed here that I don't like. I'm going to get rid of. It's that little bit. Pepsi Cola said, looks good at least. Thanks. Yeah, we're getting there. It's a slow process, but it's relatively faster than a lot of processes. That's the bizarre part. I don't like how splotchy that's coming out. I also don't like that the shortcut keeps going back. Okay. There we go. No more complaints. We're going to get through this, guys. How are you guys doing? What are you working on? So, Pepsi Cola, you said you're a writer. Do you write books? Like write short stories? What do you write? I'd love to hear it. Are you working on anything currently? let's see here. If anyone else is working on projects, feel free to chime in on the chats. I know there's a couple people watching. More than happy to hear what you guys are doing. It's getting late into the night, early into the morning, whichever way you're looking at it. Pepsi Cola said, do you have an estimated time of completion for this? I was hoping that I'd have this done by April, but it's not looking like that's going to happen. So I don't know. I'm going to have to kind of revisit that and talk to my publisher about it too, because we're only at really like the halfway point at this point. So I would almost hope by like the end of summer, maybe having this done. Which would be a little ambitious, but again, it's kind of weird because I've finally gotten to the point, especially with comics, obviously with like clients that are on short-term, things, and it's not projects that I have like vested, interest in the royalties or anything like that. It's like, you're going to hit your deadline no matter what. But like with something like this, I feel like if I have to go between the sacrifice of, I mean, obviously you're always sacrificing quality a little bit, right? You can't spend like a year on a page and end up with a graphic novel before you're dead. So there is a balance, but there is a certain level of good that I want this to be, that where it just won't be worth it if it's not to a certain quality. And so there's a certain quality I'm just not going to be willing to sacrifice. And if that means like having to make it come out a little later. And the nice thing is, so far, I believe the publisher's kind of on board with that too. But it's like, if it needs to be extended to be a really great book, I think that's just what it's going to come down to. Because at the end of the day, these things potentially could sell like hotcakes. They may not. But at the end of the day, if you don't end up with a good book, you don't really end up with a purpose to like making these things anyway. So I don't know. Pepsi Cola said, no pressure. You'll get there. Looking forward to it. Same with fellow writers who work within the classic realm, who deeply appreciate these writers and characters. Yeah, I really can't wait to get it done, though. I am really excited. And I can't wait to get a little further in the plot because it gets wild. It like starts very Victorian, Jane Austen, kind of vibes. But there's like this looming ominous feeling the whole time you're reading it, and then like it starts getting really, really spooky and kind of interesting. It's just getting to the point where all of the structure is there for the story's already started to play out, but like this is like the good part. We're starting to get to the rising action, and that's pretty exciting. So all the stilts are set up, and it's some of them are going to get knocked down, and it's going to get interesting. So I can't wait to kind of illustrate some of those sections. I think this is going to be a great book. I really do. But I want to do a good job on it. So we are getting closer. And we're going to have at minimum, we're going to get through some of this. That shortcut thing is driving me nuts. It's like I hit E and it just goes back to the brush. Okay. So we have about 15 minutes left of the stream. I want to thank anybody who's been watching this. If you have been watching it, please take the brief second to hit the like button. If you want to comment, that would be appreciated. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. And most importantly, make sure you guys are having a rad night or morning if you're watching this after the fact. And I can't wait to see what goes down as the story progresses, because like that's the funnest part. Funnest isn't a word. The most fun part. Even if funnest is a word, it just sounds wrong. The most fun part of doing this kind of thing and working on a long project like this is the like in slow motion, very slow motion. You get to be a reader and experience it too. So like, you know, when I finish a page, it's fun because it's like the first time I'm able to like fully see this thing that, you know, I'm thumbnailing out, and like the writer had like envisioned, and we're able to actually see it play out. Pepsi Cola said funnest for sure. Yes. The funnest, bestest of all. So yeah, I think that's really actually quite a remarkable feeling when you like, and that's, I think that might be the weird thing that's slightly addictive about the process of making comics, is that kind of seeing this thing you want to see slowly evolve and actually happen. Because you kind of have to be a bit of a fan of the thing you're making. I think to be able to stick with it. So if you're not a fan of it, like, why would you be doing it? So you have to first and foremost want to see the thing you're making happen, and then, you know, that you get rewarded because you get to see the thing you're making happen, which is pretty fun. So, but you have to do it at a painstakingly slow pace, which makes sense. I think that's very similar to like the process of writing too. Where, you know, if you're writing a book or something like that, it's a very slow process to get to draft 6 or whatever, you know, and to shape the whole thing and to get all the plot structured. And but it's also fun to like make this something out of nothing, you know, that we all like making. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you gotta slightly enjoy that, or why would you do it, you know? Okay, so we have almost finished this section. Almost. Now I want it to go real dark here. And I want it to go pretty dark, like towards the spot here. Maybe get a little darker here, creating a little more atmosphere. This eraser shortcut is driving me nuts. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it like goes like I have to hit E 5 times to get it to switch from brush. This is strange. Okay. We have that section going. We're just erasing away. And now we have about 12 minutes left of the stream. We're going to finish. You know what we'll do? I'll just say we're going to finish this panel and then we will call it, because I think we have enough time to get this panel done. Almost. and then we will call it for the stream, leaving only 2 panels to shade and then a full page to color tomorrow. So tomorrow I'll be recording with my friend who's also named Josh. We'll be working for an hour or two. We do this every Sunday where we are working on an album for No Saboteurs. And that should be a lot of fun. If you want to hear our first 2 experiments, you can check out the No Saboteurs album. On streaming platforms everywhere, or Apple Music. Just look up No Saboteurs. We have 2 albums out. And you can also hear my solo stuff if you're just kind of curious to hear like the music. It's definitely like more of a hobby than the art stuff. Pepsi Cola said, when you said also named Josh, I pictured you getting a standing mirror out. No, it's funny. Me and this Josh have been friends since like 7th grade. And that has been a long-standing joke whenever I tell people about him who haven't met him. I've just been like, watch, you're going to find out I've secretly just been like hanging out with myself. We've had him on stream, though. He was on an episode of Artcasters a while back. He's a brilliant teacher. Teaches high school art locally here. And also a really great graphic designer. And I'm trying to get that shortcut for the brush to work. Man, I will tell you, if I ever go to Adobe Max again, that will be the thing I bug the Adobe folks about. Is like, why does the shortcut for the eraser tool just default back and forth? Like, it won't switch over like it used to. What is going on? But yes, that's always been an on-running joke, is because his name is Josh too, and he's like my best friend. So it's like when your best friend has the same name as you, it's like, sure, that's your best friend. Flash forward to me, hanging out with a mirror and being like, well, Josh, what are we going to play today? Pepsi Cola said, no judgment if so. Maybe slight judgment, but really that's awesome you both continue with art. And what's funny is growing up, like we took a lot of college classes together, and it would be like when we took roll, like we would argue over which one of us was going to be called Josh 2 and which one would be called Josh 1 by the teacher. Okay. Let's do this. We're going to do that ground part, which I think is slightly working already, but we need to make it work. Yeah, there we go. Okay, now we're going to erase away all the stuff that is in excess, and then we will call it a night. Thanks to everybody who's been watching this. I really appreciate you guys. Pepsi Cola, it's fun to hear from you. I'm glad you checked out the work and checked out Jacob's Apartment and 2 Stories. That means a lot. Thanks for supporting indie comics, and I'm glad you enjoyed them and that you are checking out the stream. Thanks to everybody else who chimed in the chats. Make sure you guys check out Jim Lujan's channel to hear some very amazing albums. American Fist by Jim Lujan on his channel. I don't think it's by him. It's just a strange man named American Fist who like posted an album on there. But it's funny and worth checking out. Although don't tell the American Fist that it's funny, or he'll get in a American fight with you. Thanks to everybody who is subscribed to this channel. If you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit the bell because I'll probably be streaming again tomorrow. That way you get notifications when I'm about to go live. And I think that might get us to almost there. So that's how much we got done. We will finish the rest tomorrow. Nice. Pepsi Cola said, I will support Jim's Alternative America. Yeah, that's right. All right, guys. Have a good night. And I will see you guys tomorrow when I stream again and we make comics again. And hopefully finish this page entirely. So, like, hopefully finish shading it and coloring it. All right, I will see you guys on the stream tomorrow. In the meantime, have a good night. Bye.